morning air tasted of salt and iron. From the ramparts of the Red Keep, the Blackwater Bay lay dull as hammered pewter beneath a low skein of cloud. The city's stink crept uphill even this early. Tanneries and fish, the ash of spent nights and the sourness of too many men packed too close. In the practice yard above Maegor's holdfast, the stone was already warm underfoot. Blunted swords clacked and rang. A gull laughed, high and insolent. Jon moved with the weight and balance of the pine waster as if it were an extension of his body. He had learned to take up a blade the way others learned to take up a pen. Quietly, again and again, until the wrist remembered and the shoulder did not tire, until the hips remained set no matter the feint. Sweat rolled from his hairline, stinging his eyes and making the world a blur of pale yard and darker opponents. Ser Aaron Santagar circled him like an older cat around a young wolf, the Dornishman's mustache wet, his voice thick with heat and amusement. "Keep your heel down, Highness," Santagar said. "You step back as if the stone bites." "Does the stone bite you?" "It bites everyone when they fall," Jon answered, closing to beat aside the Ser's blade and slide off, neat as a fish. The ghost of a grin touched Santagar's mouth. "And you do not intend to fall," he said. "Good." Again. The huff of breath, the stamp of boots. Joffrey prowled the rail of the yard with a look of avid disdain, pale hair spraying like wheat under a circlet of gold. The cloth of his doublet glowed crimson and deeper crimson where lions fought with the same lion. Behind him were Sandor Clegane in his mail and Blankhound's face, and a pair of gold cloaks who laughed when the prince laughed, watched when he watched. Myrcella's light brown curls peeked over the rail edge. Little Tommen clung to it like a sailor at a storm's edge, lips parted in earnest fascination. "Hit him," Joffrey called, bored and impatient at once. "Santagar, make him work." "His Highness is working." Santagar slid in and sent his oak blade down with a sound like a door slammed in wind. Jon met it, then let the force pass and turned it. Their swords tangled and went apart. Santagar spun and the oak blurred again. Jon took it on the flat and riposted, the movement tight and ugly as he had been taught. Nothing for show, only the small violence that counted. He nicked the master-at-arms on the wrist through the thick padding. Santagar smiled. "Better," he said softly. Joffrey's mouth twisted. "If he's so much better, make him spar with me." Santagar had the look of a man bracing for a thrown cup. "As you wish, Your Grace." He took the blunted sword from Jon and handed it hilt first to the younger prince. "Touch only," he said. "We do not break teeth in the yard." Joffrey's eyes flicked to Sandor and back. "Stand aside, dog," he said, stepping through the gate, still in his doublet. "I'll not have a craven watching me." The hound's face did not change, the puckered ruin on one side as expressionless as the other. He moved to the shade and leaned on a post. Jon rolled his shoulders as Joffrey strutted to the chalked circle. He had learned long ago how to hold himself before Joffrey. Not wary, for that angered him. Not arrogant, for that enraged him. Not even deferential, which he took for mockery. What Joffrey wanted he often did not know himself, and so he punished others for his confusion. Jon met him in the circle and lowered the tip of the pine in courtesy. Joffrey slapped it away. "You lower your sword to your betters," he said, and rushed. There was a kind of beauty in movement when it came right. Joffrey lunged, a boy who had been loosed and loath to miss, and Jon turned his shoulders and let the oak slide past, set his foot to trip, and tapped Joffrey's ribs. They made a sound like a finger drumming a cask. Joffrey snarled and turned, fast and clumsy both. He swung. Jon caught the blade, twisted, and made another touch. The second touch was to the ankle and it made Joffrey hop and swear. "Stop playing," Joffrey said through teeth. He came again. It did not take long to make a fool of another boy, even a prince, and Jon had no desire to make a fool of anyone. He tried to end it quickly. A neat arm bind, a touch to the chest. But Joffrey wrenched free and flailed, and there was a corner, and there were Santagar's shouted cautions, and then there was the thud of a body against the rail and a golden boy falling. The world took one breath. Joffrey's hand slapped stone. He pushed up with a noise. Sandor's laugh was like a bolt dropped on iron, the slap of soft shoes on flagstones. Cersei Lannister swept into the yard like a winter wind that had learned to smile. She moved easily in green silk, as if the stones beneath her feet had been crafted to carry her and only her, and her hair was a jealous sun. The yard bent around her. Guards straightened. Santagar dipped. Jon took a step back without knowing he had. The Queen's green eyes found Joffrey, found the smear of dust on his flank, and then found Jon. It took no time at all for scorn to breed scorn in those eyes. It was as if she saw in him someone else entirely and disliked the sight. "What is this?" she asked, as if she had not seen, and Myrcella's mouth opened but no sound came out. "Training," Santagar said. "His Highnesses had a bout. They both did well." "They both," Cersei murmured, tasting the word like a bitter herb. She looked at Jon's hair, black as a raven's wing, at his eyes, which were dark but not quite black. There was a stark shape to his face, someone had once told him. The line from brow to cheek and the solemn gravity that sat there even when he smiled. Sometimes the Queen stared as if she saw in him something she had tried to forget. He could not decide if that was pity or condemnation. Joffrey rose and brushed at his doublet with furious little strikes. "It was nothing," he said, as if it had been everything. "I slipped on the chalk." "I see," Cersei said. "And was it the chalk that laid hands upon you?" "Never mind," Joffrey said too loudly. "I'll beat him when it matters." "Indeed you will." She held him with a glance that was both caress and command, then returned to Jon. "Do you think it wise to humiliate your brother?" she asked. "No." She let the answer remain unborn. A king's son must learn how to rule and how to be seen to rule. He does not learn by being thrown in the dirt. Jon had not thrown him. That was a truth with the awkwardness of a stone at the bottom of the mouth. Yet he only bowed. "Your Grace," he said softly. Sandor stared at him with that unreadable gaze. Joffrey glared. The Queen's mouth softened into something like satisfaction, and she turned. The silk whispered. She left the yard with her cubs in tow, and the shadow she cast seemed larger than her body. "Enough," Santagar said into the silence. "Venge. Eat. We'll cut real wood this afternoon." He clapped Jon's shoulder in rough apology. "You did well," he added low. In the shade of the colonnade, Jon poured water over his hair and watched it strike stone and trace away. The droplets carried a faint trace of oil from the practiced sword. He ground his thumb against callus and thought of courts and circles and brothers he would never resemble. Sometimes he studied his face in the depthless black of water in the wash basin and tried to see his father there. Robert often said he had lioness eyes, but Robert said such things when the wine was very good and the hour very late. Robert, who laughed like breaking oars and wept when he thought no one saw. He went to the Godswood when he had dried and changed. King's Landing's Godswood was a pale thing, a faint memory of Northwood. There had been a weirwood before Maegor's time, the Septons said, until axes and piety had done what winter could not. What remained was a quiet walled garden with a thin pool and ash trees that trembled when the bay wind found them. Jon came to the bench by the water because it was the only place in the keep where silence was not suspect. He sat. For a long time he said nothing. The pool reflected nothing but a tired sky. His father found him there. Robert Baratheon did not walk softly anywhere. The Godswood resisted him as it did all men. But the wind bowed and the ash leaves quivered when he appeared as if some ancient memory had been stirred. He had not dressed like a king. He wore a rough shirt and a pair of hose that had seen better days, and he had a stick in one hand he used to beat the bedded earth into submission. He was thicker than he had been in the songs, thicker every year, a barrel with a beard, yet some part of him was still as terrible as the storm on Shipbreaker Bay. "Boy," Robert said. The word did not mean boy. It meant something infinitely warmer. It meant, I did not come to find you and put words to it. It meant I came anyway. Santagar says you're roughing my other cub. Jon rose. We were practicing, father. Aye. Robert set the stick aside and lowered himself onto the bench with a grunt that belonged to an old man but not to the spirit inside him. He stretched his legs and stared at the water as if it had said something he did not know how to answer. He needs roughing. He needs something. Robert scratched his beard, glanced at Jon sidelong. You did not hurt him.
No.
Good. A moment passed. He's a peacock. Gods help me, his mother breeds peacocks. The king's smile was brief. He looked down again. It's a poor god's wood, he said. When we go north, I'll show you a real one. Stones older than the kingdoms, trees with faces so strange you'll think they look back. Your aunt loved them. My lady, Lyanna, Jon said, uncertain what to call her. She was not quite a memory to him, too often spoken of for that. Neither was she a living woman. She was an ache he had studied from afar, a name his father could not say without softening and without drinking more than usual after. Robert sat very still, as if stillness could hide how the name touched him. Lyanna, he said anyway. You have her stubbornness when you set your jaw. I've learned to recognize it. Your nurse blamed the Stormlands when you howled as a babe. She never knew you were howling at me. Jon smiled despite himself. She said I howled at the rain. You howled to be heard. You still do. Robert's voice grew rougher around the edges. You are my son, he said, and the words were both fact and plea. You know that. I know what you have told me, Jon replied. Robert took a breath as if a rib pinched him and let it out slowly. He looked at the pool and then at his hands, at the scars on the knuckles that had faded to bone-white lines, at the hair going gray. There are questions in your face. You've had them since you learned to make them. Speak. Jon did not like to speak of it. Questions made a man uncertain. Uncertainty made men like Littlefinger smile and men like Varys purr and men like Stannis scowl as if they had tasted a lemon. Yet he had begun now and could not stop. Why was I not in Storm's End? He asked. Why the Red Keep? You say a prince must be seen. But you hid me for years and then you brought me out like a blade from a bundle and said, Here, I am not a sword. Robert barked laughter that was almost anger. No, he said. You are the hand that holds one. I hid you because I did not trust how the realm would take you. I brought you out because I stopped caring. Put it in whichever order flatters me less. It remains. He scrubbed at his face with meaty fingers. I wed a lioness to end a war. If I had given her cause at once to see a wolf at her table every morning. Well, there is a reason I put off your page's years and called you to me when I did. It was not only love, he said, as if that were the smallest portion of it. Sometimes we love unwisely, Jon. You married the queen. And you are my son. Robert fixed him then, his blue eyes suddenly very sharp. You will be named Prince of Dragonstone before summer is done. I have tarried long because I wanted peace in my hall. That was foolishness. I will not leave the realm to lions if I fall. The words landed like stones in Jon's chest. Do you hear me? I hear you, Jon said. His mouth had gone dry. What of Joffrey, Myrcella, Tommen? I will provide for them, Robert said too quickly. I will provide well. They will wed and live in golden halls, if I have to build the damn things myself. But you are my eldest son. He said it again to make it true twice and again to make the third time charm the gods. I know what men murmur. I know what your face says to them when they think of your mother and the bed she lay in. I have learned to not hear men when I choose not to. You will learn the same. Jon looked at his father and saw a tired giant with a heart full of thunder trying to remember how to rest. He felt young and very old at once. You name me your heir now, he said, and you make an enemy of the queen. Cersei has been my enemy since the hour we wed, Robert said bitterly. There, I have said it aloud and no roof fell. She is beautiful and clever and dead within where I am supposed to be. Yet I kept her at my table because I wanted a realm to hand you. If she claws at you, I will cut her nails myself. He shook himself, stood. We are done with this moping, he said with false cheer. There's boar enough in the Kingswood, and I mean to see it and put a spear in it. He glanced toward the walls. Come with me. Santagar says your spear work is better than your sword. Better than Joffrey's, Jon said. then saw the mistake too late. Robert grinned. Everything is better than Joffrey's. That is no boast. He clapped Jon's shoulder hard enough to push him half a step. Come. The day grows close and the wine grows warm and the boar grows fat when kings delay. He strode off with the stick in his hand like a spear, and the gods would creaked with relief when he left it. Jon sat another moment and watched the pool. In his mind, the silent ash trees along the wall became the faces of ancient weirwoods with red sap running like tears. When he rose, the sea breeze had shifted. It came with a faint promise of rain. He found the hand of the king in the hand's solar that afternoon, standing under a painted screen where stags leapt and wolves ran and eagles frowned. The tower of the hand housed its own draft of whispers, and the old man held them at bay by the simple act of bearing himself like someone who had forgotten how to enjoy fear. Jon Arryn was not tall, but composed men often do not need height. His hair last year had been gray that was almost white. This year it had thinned like snow in thaw. He anticipated Jon's presence without turning. "You went to the Godswood," Arryn said. "I did. You have your father's appetite for quiet when it suits you," the old man said. He turned. "And your mother's face, if you will forgive the liberty." Jon did not know if he could, but he nodded anyway. "You have never spoken to me of her." "I have not," Arryn said. He walked to the table and opened a heavy book. The kind men joked could crush a rat without being lifted. He touched the vellum with courteous fingertips. "When I was young, I thought all books in King's Landing smelled alike. Dust and mice and the oil of too many fingers. They do not." He patted the open page. "This one smells of ink and insistence. It is the lineages and histories of the great houses of the Seven Kingdoms." Jon smiled despite himself. "A merry red. A necessary one." Arryn's voice had that soft way of making a command sound like a kindness. "You will not rule by swinging a sword. You will rule by recognizing which men swing for you and why." He traced a line in the margin. "Do you know this phrase?" he asked. "The seed is strong. It is not poetry. It is a dull genealogist saying that a black-haired man will often throw black-haired sons no matter what coloring the wife brings. There have been stubborn exceptions. Not many." Jon had looked into mirrors too often not to understand what Arryn suggested and did not voice. "You are the king's hand. You are supposed to bring him matters fit to his hand." "Sometimes I bring matters to the sun," Arryn said gently, closing the heavy book. "Because fathers die, Jon. It is their habit. And I am old and intend to defy that habit as long as I may by training men who will be living when I am gone." "How many men have you trained?" "Fewer than I should," Arryn said and smiled. "But enough if they are the right men." He sat. Jon stood. Rain ticked for an instant at the narrow window glass, then stopped. "You have a kindness in you," Arryn said. "That is not always an advantage. Keep it. Learn where to apply it and where not." He lifted the book again. "Will you read a chapter for me? About the first Baratheon, Orys? There are things in old stories that leach into the present like wine into a tablecloth." Slowly and for a long time, Jon read, and the letters tasted like old iron. Arryn listened and gave no sign of weariness, though Jon had seen his hands tremble when he thought no one looked. When the page was done, Arryn closed his eyes for a heartbeat as if he had swallowed a draught too cold. Then he nodded and stood and carefully closed the book and placed it back in its slot. That night, the hand of the king coughed in his chamber, and the cough had a grit to it like sand between teeth. The next morning the city rang with bells, and the great September of Baelor filled with light and wept glass. And Jon Arryn lay on a cold table beneath a cloth that made him look like any other old man whose breath had gone out while he slept. Jon stood among men who hid their relief in sorrow and men who hid their alarm in solemnity, and he watched his father's face harden like a door shut against a draft. Robert did not weep where men could see him that day. He went to the wine and then to the Kingswood to ride too hard and came back with mud to his waist and rage to his eyes. "Talk," he said that evening at the small council, and the talkers talked. Varys sighed and purred. Littlefinger smiled and suggested loans that were feasts to him and crumbs to the crown. Pycelle coughed into a scroll that had outlived 3 kings and may outlive 3 more. Renly smoothed nothing with easy youth. Stannis was absent. He had sailed to Dragonstone not a fortnight past, because sometimes a man too stern for a room must go to a room whose stones do not let a voice rebound. They wrote for Winterfell. They sent for Eddard Stark. When the Lord of Winterfell rode through the Lion Gate with his daughters and a retinue of gray and brown, the city smelled less that day and more. Rain had washed the gutters at dawn and the tanneries had slept. Jon had often seen his father's few surviving friends when they came by ship or road. Lord Stannis, who frowned from within his bones. Lord Renly, who made jest of his own charm. Ser Barristan, who moved lightly under a weight of memory. But he had never stood before Eddard Stark the way he did now, in the yard, with the rain drying on stone and the sun fingering the puddles as if it were curious. Eddard was as tall as Robert but more narrow. He carried his grief quietly, and so it weighed more. When he saw Jon, there was a flicker in his gray eyes that might have been winter sunlight. Jon bowed as to a great lord, and when he rose, Eddard reached and touched his shoulder with that same quickness he had used to pat a horse once in a courtyard full of onlookers. "My lord," Jon said. His own voice sounded to him like a boy's again, and he did not know why. "Your Highness," Eddard said, as if the words hurt and he chose them anyway. A close his Fa. C was older than the picture that had grown in Jon's mind from years of stories. More lines at the corners of the eyes, more pale scars that sat against the beard. "You look well. So do you." It was untrue. Eddard looked thinner and harder, as if the road had pared him down to the parts that mattered and thrown the rest to the crows. Arya Stark peered around her father's thigh. She was all elbows and questions, and her eyes belonged to a different world than the one that made lace. Sansa, beside her, was the picture of a lady's daughter, and that picture had already begun to believe itself. Jon felt, unexpectedly and disloyally, a wash of protectiveness for them both. King's Landing was not kind to girls whose curiosity outpaced their caution. At supper that night, Robert embraced Eddard before the court, and the hall moved a little easier on its benches for the first time in days. Cersei watched the embrace with a gaze that might have been ice melted into water. Tyrion Lannister had arrived, it seemed, and his laugh wandered the room like a fox that had slipped past a snare. The boar brought in on a spit dripped fat and promise. Singers sang old songs because men wanted to pretend they remembered nobler hours. Later, when the candles had guttered to stumps, Jon went to the empty Godswood and found that Eddard Stark had gone there first. The Lord of Winterfell stood by the poor pool as if he could make it something else by looking at it long enough. He did not turn when Jon's step sounded. Jon did not speak to him. Silence expanded between them without tension, like a cloak shared on a cold night. After a time, Eddard said, "Your father says he means to name you Prince of Dragonstone." "He does," Jon said, because there was no use in hiding what would be shouted soon. Eddard nodded once, as if he had expected it, and the nod contained something like relief and something like dread. "It will make enemies of men already inclined," he said. "That is the habit of truth," Jon replied without intending to be clever. "The water here is very still," he added to change the subject, and wanted to laugh at himself for such clumsiness. Eddard did not laugh at him. "In Winterfell, the water goes on even in winter," Eddard said. "Beneath the ice. There is a sound to it you hear in your bones if you were born to it. Tywin Lannister's men burned a Godswood once. The stream beneath it ran all the same." He stood very still. "Your Lyanna loved the Godswood." He spoke the name like a man making an oath. "She would have liked your hands, strong and careful. She would have liked that you pretend to patience but cannot help but look at doors." Jon swallowed. "Is that so?" "It is," Eddard said. He glanced at him quickly, and in that look there was a whole winter's worth of unspoken things. "There are many things I might say to you," he said. "Your father is my king and my friend. I am his hand. You are his son." "You know something I do not," Jon said without accusation. "I know many things," Eddard said, and a ghost of a smile touched his mouth. "I intend to keep at least some of them contained a while longer. For your sake. For others." His hand tightened and relaxed as if he had meant to reach for Jon's shoulder again and stopped himself. You will be watched here. I have been watched all my life. More closely now. Not all those eyes wish you well. Not all those eyes will be honest about it. Eddard stared at the ash leaves. The city is a maze of pride. Do not bend yours to match it. Let it be the iron in you, but do not let it break you. There is a difference between stubbornness and honor. He paused. Forgive an old man his sermons. I have heard worse. Jon tried to smile. From Pycelle. Then the gods do not hate you. Eddard did smile at that. I will have my girls trained in the mornings in a small hall near the treasury. If you have leisure, your presence might keep fools from using them for sport. I will come, Jon said. He did, and learned that Arya moved like a reed with a blade, and that Sansa had courage no one suspected because it took a different shape than men liked. He learned Jory Castle told stories while polishing steel that were better than most singers' songs, and that Septa Mordain worried well and loudly and was not heard any better for it. He learned that in the armory over Tobo Mott's forge there dwelt a big-shouldered apprentice with hair black as coal and eyes as blue as the bay, and that the apprentice hammered the way a man prays when he believes his god will answer if only he strikes enough sparks. Jon paid for a helm on a day when he had not intended to buy anything and stayed too long to watch it take shape. You make a good edge, he said, and the apprentice flushed with a pleasure he tried to hide. What is your name? Gendry, the boy said, cautious. He looked at Jon as if the prince wore a mask he did not trust to stay steady. I have seen men with your face, Jon said before he could think better of it. He thought of a girl with black hair and surprise in the shape of her eyebrows, and a boy no older than Gendry who had run at the high table to steal a plum from the Lord's dish, and the way Robert had roared with laughter and plucked the child up with calloused hands and kissed his brow. He thought of his father's bigness folding into kindness. I like the way you work, he said, which contained far too much and yet not enough. In those days, the corridors of the Red Keep grew narrower, as if the walls themselves leaned in. Varys' shadow glided where benches shook with suppressed laughter. Littlefinger's mockingbird pin bespoke a man too pleased by his own emblem. Pycelle's beard smelt of balm and sleep. Jaime Lannister's white cloak flashed like a gull's wing in the hall of 1,000 lamps, and his smile was so clean men boasted of their dirt to spite it. Sandor Clegane stood too long with his hands hanging and watched everything. Sometimes he watched Jon. Cersei watched more. When Robert announced at council that he meant to go to the Kingswood to hunt before naming his heir, the Queen's expression did not change. Yet when Jon glanced at her, he imagined he could hear ice cracking far off. It was an odd thought in summer. You will go with him? Eddard asked when they walked in the yard. Santagar's men were oiled leather and clipped words in the near distance. The wind had shifted, blowing out to sea. Yes. Good, Eddard said. Make certain he comes back. They rode the next morning with a small train, too small for a king, too large for secrecy. Lancel Lannister rode at the king's stirrup with a wineskin and the solemn consequence of a boy entrusted with a man's sin. Renly had claimed a headache and did not come. Jaime had a duty in the keep and did not come. Sandor came from inclination and because the hound liked nothing better than to sink his teeth into something that could bite back. Barristan did not ride because a king on a hunt wore no crown and needed no white shadow at his shoulder. Jon rode near his father and tried to make his eyes pay better attention to the ground than his thoughts. The Kingswood smelled of green and loam and old rain. The trackers found sign and spoke in the shorthand of men who had learned to tell stories in dirt. Jon carried a boar spear and the weight of it was a comfort. He had always preferred the right weapon for the right work. The boar they found was ripe and angry, a great boar with foam at his jaw and a back bristling black. When he broke cover he did so without warning, and the dogs went wild and the men shouted and someone laughed because fear often sounds like laughter. Robert, who had been riding and swearing at a branch that had the insolence to be exactly where it was, sat the saddle as if he had been born in it, and he lifted his spear and grinned like a boy who had stolen a cake, and then the boar was on them. It was queer what memory took. Jon would remember for years the way the leaf shadow dappled the boar's flanks as it drove, and that a bee floated past his field of vision like a mote in a window ray. He would remember the sound of the spear's tip biting air, and the heavy, ugly grunt behind the scream of the dogs. He would remember his father's voice, wordless, thick with joy. He would remember Lancel's spilling wineskin, the smell of sour grapes gone to the ground. And he would remember the change. Fear moved like a fish in muddy water. The boar spun, the way large things do with astonishing speed, and his tusk caught the lower edge of Robert's mail, and the king's cry was no longer joy. It was raw pain. He lurched in the saddle. The boar came again. Jon did not think. He put his horse forward, and the horse did not hesitate, because sometimes a horse has more courage than a man. He set the spear as he had been taught. Let the charge plant the point, do not fight the boar, let its anger carry it on to death. And the shaft shivered in his hands with a shudder that almost wrenched him from the saddle. The boar screamed. The world contracted to black hide and red mouth. The spear broke. Jon threw the butt into the boar's eye as a reflex, and the boar fell, and then Sandor was there with a second spear, and a third man with a fourth, and the dogs found throats the spears had missed. Jon spat on the ground because his mouth tasted of tin and his fingers would not stop trembling. He turned, and Robert was swaying in the saddle like a tall ship wedged by a sudden reef. Blood ran where the mail had failed. Lancel's face had gone milk white. "Wine," Robert said thickly. "Oh, for shit, no more wine. I bleed enough." He tried to laugh and choked on it. His eyes found Jon's. "Good," he said in a hoarse voice. "Good work, boy." He sagged. They bound him as best they could with strips torn from cloaks and Lancel's shaking attempts at competence. They made a bier of spears and saplings and bore him by slow, careful inches to the road. The ride back to the city was too long and too short both. Every hooffall came with a prayer Jon had not known he had inside him. When the walls of the keep rose, their color was the color of old blood. Cersei was waiting at the gate with a face that did not move. When she saw the king and the king's blood, she came forward in a single smooth step and called for Pycelle and for clean cloth and for a chair and for silence. And she got all she asked for because her voice made refusal an obscenity. "Who gave him wine?" she asked later, when Robert lay in the bed big enough for 6 men and looked small in it. "I did," Lancel whispered. He had lost the color in his lips. "Of course you did," the queen said, so softly that it made the room go colder. "Fetch more," she told him. "You'll make yourself useful before today is out." He went. Pycelle fussed with herbs and poultices and muttered phrases in Valyrian to show that he could, and Robert endured like a man who believes the pain is a tax for a victory already won. He slept with a growl in his chest, and his hands moved as if they still reached for the spear. That night, when the hall fires had burned low, Robert woke and said, "Bring me Ned and the boy." He called Jon the boy even then, and there was more mercy in it than anything else he had done that day. Eddard came with the step of a man who had never learned to hurry for anyone. Cersei watched him with the immobility of a cat. "Get out," Robert said to her without looking. "All of you, hells you two Grand Maester, out." He did not raise his voice, but something in it made obeying the easiest act a body could perform. The queen left last. She did not bend. She did not look at Jon. When the chamber had emptied but for the king and his hand and his son, Robert laughed a little and then winced for it. "I've had worse," he said. "I haven't, but I will say it anyway." The candlelight made his face strange and big, a giant's in a child's story. He reached, and Eddard put his hand into Robert's, and the big hand closed and made Ned wince. "You are not dying," Eddard said. "Not today," Robert said, cheerful again. "I had thought to make a fine speech for the realm when I named him." He jerked his chin at Jon. "I almost made a finer one in the woods. That would have been something." "We can still have a speech," Eddard said dryly. "Aye." Robert coughed, grimaced, then grinned. "I'm a fool," he said to Ned. "For the wine, for the boar, for too many things you will count to me one day when I am sober and you are cruel. But I am not fool enough to let my realm go to wolves dressed as lions. Write it for me. I will sign. My son and heir, Jon of House Baratheon, Prince of Dragonstone." He looked at Eddard expectantly. as if he had asked for a fresh cask of ale and wanted it drawn young. Eddard did not move for a moment. The moment looked like 20 years. He looked at Jon, and in his eyes there was a storm and a clearing and the briefest hint of snow. Then he nodded once and went to the table and took quill and ink and wrote the words as they had been spoken. He did not change a letter. Jon watched his hand and thought of the weight of each curve and stroke. When Ned had done, he brought the sheet and held it out. Robert signed with a flourish that smeared a fraction of the way through the B. He looked at it, pleased like a man who has built a shed with his own hands and does not care that a beam sits crooked. "There," he said. "Done is done." He fell back and closed his eyes and slept at once, as if the act had been more exhausting than the hunt. "Keep this," Eddard said to Jon after a moment, when the breathing in the room had settled into the steady sound of a man attempting to keep his place in the world. "On your person. Do not let it roam until it is time to show it." He did not touch Jon with his hands. The paper was touch enough. Jon took it. "Will this be enough?" Jon asked. Eddard's mouth made a line. "Enough for men who want to believe. Not enough for those who have decided not to." The throne room was full the next day, and its air had the quality of the inside of a drum. Word had gone that the king had returned from the Kingswood pierced and victorious and angry, and men gathered to be near anger in case some fell off and they might catch it in open hands. Robert wore a bandage that annoyed him. He scratched at it and swore at any man whose face betrayed the foolishness to scold. He strode to the steps below the Iron Throne and did not mount them because he had always hated that chair and the posture it required. "My lords," he said, and the lords bent. "My ladies," he added as if an afterthought, and the ladies inclined, some of them more stiffly. "I hunted yesterday," he went on, "and found what I went for." He looked at Jon and his mouth twitched. "I also found I am not what I was when I was 20. I will not pretend. But I am still the king." He let the sentence fall hard. Cersei stood at the edge of the dais, her face carved from honeyed stone. Joffrey stood beside her wearing a tunic stiff with lions and contempt. Tommen had a sweet look that made Jon want to get him out of the room. Myrcella stood straight and her chin was brave. The King's Guard made a white fence that hid nothing. "I mean to name my heir," Robert said. The murmur that went through the hall belonged to a market where someone had dropped a dish and all the buyers looked to see if it had shattered. "I mean to do it now, while my voice carries and my hand is to the pen." He lifted his head like a bull that had scented a rival in a distant field. "Jon of House Baratheon, my son, will hold Dragonstone and after me the realm, God's willing. Silence is a sound. It has a weight you can put to your teeth." Pressed the room. Cersei's smile formed slowly, as if she wanted to savor every fraction of it. "Your Grace," she said, each syllable polished and deadly. "Surely you mean your eldest legitimate son." "I mean my son," Robert said, and that was the first time he sounded tired. "Then you mean Joffrey," she said. "We have a September. We have a book. We have a marriage signed by gods and men." She turned to the hall. Let them see her profile against the throne's blackness. "We have children who look upon their father and see him in their own faces." Someone said, half sarcastic, then coughed to hide it. Robert's color rose. "We have a realm to think of," he snapped. "We have peace to keep. We have an heir who can ride and raise a blade without scaring the old women and the dogs." A laugh chased that line and died when Cersei looked at it. "Peace," she said, as if tasting a foreign word. "You intend to keep it by breaking your vows and spiting the great houses? My father will take this well. You could have used the sentence to sharpen a knife." "I am the king," Robert said, the stupid, simple defense of a man who has discovered how often those words do not work. He lifted his chin and saw the smirks, the fear, the calculating eyes. He looked at his friend the Hand. Eddard's face was the calm of a winter pond with pitch beneath. "Your Grace," Pycelle began with bearded importance, "these matters may require, that is, we might shut our mouths," Robert said, and the Grand Maester's jaw clicked. "I have made my decree. I have named my heir. It is done." Cersei did not raise her voice or lower it. "You have named your bastard," she said, in the tone used to note the weather. It was the first time she had put the word in the air where everyone could smell it. "And you will not legitimize him without a great council." She turned to the hall. "Is that not so?" she asked, and Pycelle, the honorable old man, who had spent his honor long ago and always had a few coppers of it jingling when needed for show, cleared his throat and said something long and vacillating that could be trimmed to yes. Robert's mouth opened. He had not expected her to play the law. It had never been his game. He looked toward Stannis' empty place as if the iron would manifest a younger brother to be angry for him. Failing that, he looked at his son. Jon felt the weight of 100, 200, 300 eyes. No. He felt the weight of the gaze of one man who had swung a hammer in a rebellion because his heart had been stolen and his pride had been wounded, and whose life had been thereafter a long attempt to make the story match the song. He stepped forward and bowed very small. "My father speaks of peace," Jon said. "I will heed him. If the realm wishes a great council, let us have it. Let us summon lords and ladies and men who eat bread under the open sky as well as under banners, and let us tell them the truth. That the king believes a man should be measured by his merit and love of this kingdom, and not only by the accident of a septon's hand on an old day." He did not look at Cersei. "If the realm loves Joffrey most, let it have him. If the realm loves me, I will not refuse to serve. If the realm loves neither of us, I will go to Dragonstone and hold it for the king and pray for all our souls." He looked finally at Joffrey. The boy's mouth worked. "I will not see men die because I wanted a chair." The hall moved, shifted, breathed. Men are not used to having their cynicism confronted with humility. It confuses them. Cersei's smile did not falter, but her eyes narrowed as if a new plan had just cost her something to invent. "You speak prettily," she said. "You have no notion what the realm loves. The realm loves strength. The realm loves a name it can wear like a cloak. It loves stories it already knows. It will not choose a curiosity." She rolled the last word in her mouth like a grape she intended to spit. "The realm has a king," Eddard said, and his voice did not rise, but men turned toward it anyway. "He has named an heir, and no law says a great council must be summoned before a king may bestow that title. There, the law is served. The realm may like it or not. The realm will live. What the hand calls law today," Littlefinger murmured from somewhere behind, "we will call precedent tomorrow." His tone was one of delight dressed as neutral observation. "Enough," Robert said. He sounded like a man putting down a weight that has cost him a tooth. "It is done," he said again, smaller. After, the hall leaked courtiers like water from a cracked cask. Men went to write hurried letters in a dozen hands to 100 houses. Jon stood at the bottom of the steps and felt like a man who had jumped from a cliff and discovered the sea below him had frozen the instant before he struck it. He found Myrcella's face in the crowd solemn, trying not to weep. He managed a smile. She dared a quick one back before her mother's hand on her shoulder turned it to stone. Joffrey came with quick, sharp steps that had sound but no rhythm. He stopped too close. "You," he said, as if the word itself accused. "You think you can take it all, Stray." His mouth worked around the last word as if it were too vulgar for the light. "I think I can take what I am given," Jon said. "I will see you dead," Joffrey said with a boy's certainty. He spoke it without flair, as if he said he would wear a red cloak on a feast day, simple and inarguable. The hound behind him shifted and watched Jon the way he watched a torch fall toward dry straw. "You will see many things," Jon said quietly. "I hope you see them well." He left the hall and breathed outside because the air beyond the pillars had not yet learned the habits of men. He went to the small sept in Maegor's holdfast that held no bones and little faith, and he knelt without knowing the prayers. He pressed his hands together and thought of water moving under winter ice and of boar spears and of ink dried on a name. He thought of Lyanna Stark, whose face had gone to stories, and of Robert Baratheon, who might never learn to stop trying to make those stories real. He thought of Eddard, whose eyes had said too much and no more. That night, someone loosened the cinches on Jon's saddle. That night, a guard who had served in the Red Keep longer than Jon had lived, had a quiet word with Sandor Clegane and earned a bottle of summer wine, and then died with less fuss than he had lived. That night, Varys' hands were lily-soft as he rearranged a slip of paper on the hand's desk and made certain the ink would not smear if a sweat-beaded palm clutched it hard in fear. That night, Cersei sat by a window that looked toward the sea and did not look at it, and her cup sat untouched and her thoughts burned a clean white fire. "Do not ride," Eddard said the next morning, before the dawn had fully lifted. "Your cinches are cut." His face was very calm. "Thank you," Jon said. He checked anyway. Eddard had not been wrong. "Come with me," the hand said. He took him not to the Godswood and not to the Sept, but to the cellar stairs beneath the Tower of the Hand. The stones there sweated even in winter. They stood under a ceiling that had not seen the sun since the dragons left, and Eddard took from a shelf a small wooden box with a plain iron hasp. He opened it and brought forth a strip of blue cloth. He unrolled it. The cloth held a withered blossom, blue still despite too many years. It was the color of the cold sky before a storm. "Your father brought this south from the Trident," Eddard said. "He has kept it. Sometimes a man keeps a token for the wrong reason and it still serves the right." He handed the flower to Jon as if it weighed more than a sword. "Take it," he said. "Keep it as long as it is useful." "Is this hers?" Jon asked and found he had to swallow twice to make the words. "It is," Eddard said. He looked at Jon as if he wanted to do a great many things. "Do not let it become a wound," he added, and that was the only mercy he could give. When they came out into the yard again, the light had become the kind that makes the Red Keep look like fossilized fire in a cliff face. Robert limped and swore and refused to be tended and went to the yard anyway to watch Santagar make men better than they wanted to be. He stared at his son and saw the cloth in his hand and looked at Eddard with a question and then with understanding and then with gratitude that the other man pretended not to deserve. "You will come to the Guild Hall of the Gold Cloaks with me," Robert told Jon in a tone that made the sentence a fact. "We will remind Janos Slynt that he obeys the crown and not the purse," he added more softly, with his mouth twisted because he knew how the world worked anyway. "Then we will drink until we cannot stand and set the city on fire." "You do not need to set it," Renly said from the arch with an easy smile. "It manages without you." They went to the city watch and spoke to men with pitted cheeks and nervous hands and eyes that watched the king's purse and the queen's purse and measured both. They went to the smithy again on a whim because Jon wanted to see Gendry hammer, and they passed Littlefinger's brothel where silk rustled and men who had spent coin pretended they had spent something else. They went anywhere and everywhere because Robert knew that sometimes a king could only rule by being seen to be where he was not expected. The next day, a riot broke in Flea Bottom because a baker's bread came out flat and his temper rose to match the oven. The small riot became a larger one because soldiers who disliked peasants more than law liked the chance to strike with impunity. Jon went with Sandor to Comet for no reason but that he should, and learned that the Hound could stare a mob into remembering they loved their children. He took a brick on the shoulder. It bruised spectacularly. That night, when the bruising hurt, he looked at the winter rose until the pain became a place he visited rather than a thing that held him by the throat. Days folded awkwardly. The naming went by either with a bang or a whimper. No one could say which. The parchment with Robert's hand grew greasy at the edges where Jon's fingers had handled it too often. Eddard's inquiries about the color of hair took him to places in the city where men forgot they had hair. Stannis remained in Dragonstone and sent letters that smoked when opened. Cersei seemed to stop moving entirely, which meant she was moving faster. Jaime smiled and walked and did not show whether he was sharpened iron or bright tin. Tyrion Lannister came and went and gave Arya a wooden wolf that she broke the tail off and loved twice as much. When the queen sent for Jon one afternoon and dismissed her ladies and stood by the room's sole window looking toward the sea she did not see, Jon went because he did not know how to do otherwise. The room smelled faintly of apples that had been left too long. "You will be wise," she said after a time, in a voice that could have coaxed a kitten from a tree. "If you are not, you will die. That is the simple arithmetic of this place." "I am learning," Jon said. "You are a boy raised to be gentle in a court that rewards only claws." Cersei turned and studied him, and for a moment it was not hatred he saw there but frank assessment. Do you know how many bastards your father has scattered across the city and others? More than your fingers and more than mine. Why should you be the one to be elevated? Because he chose me, Jon said, and only after speaking realized he had not chosen the argument that would serve him best, but the one that was true. Cersei's smile touched the corner of her mouth. He chose you because you look like someone he loved who is dead, she said very softly. That is not a strategy. That is a prayer. I do not confuse the two. You would be kinder to not confuse them yourself. She lifted her hand as if to touch his face. Whether to caress or strike he could not have said, and lowered it again. Do you love this realm? She asked suddenly. It took him a breath to answer because the question had not been asked to be answered. I think so, he said. I have not yet seen enough of it to be sure. I love its people when they let me. I love the parts of it that do not know me. Cersei laughed, and it made the hairs on Jon's arms lift. Oh, you will die, she said gently, as if she were sorry. He left with the sense of having been stripped and found wearing armor. He went to find Eddard and did not find him. He found instead Peter Baelish leaning in a doorway in the way of a man who likes to play at being furniture. A pretty speech to the realm yesterday, Littlefinger said. You will make me poor if you keep speaking so. I had bet no one would try that old trick again. What trick is that? Honesty. Littlefinger smiled, the sort that showed his neat teeth and none of his mind. It's out of fashion. It will come into fashion if I wear it, Jon said, and did not stay to hear the man's rejoinder, which would have been clever enough to sting and cheap enough to be sold again tomorrow. He slept badly that night. He dreamed of a blue flower growing from a crack in an iron chair. In the dream he reached to take it, and the chair cut his hand and he bled and the flower turned its head toward him as if it were a baby waking. He woke to dawn that claimed to be rain but was only mist. He went to the yard because there, at least, men's movements made sense. It was there that word came of trouble on the Street of Steel. Jon went with Jory and 2 others. There they found Gendry standing before the gate of Tobomot's forge, his great arms bare, his hands red with work and anger both, and a group of men in Lannister colors who had come for him as one might come for a purse that had fallen in the street. Between Gendry and the Lannister men stood Sandor Clegane with his sword sheathed and his head tilted, listening to something only he could hear. What is this? Jon asked. A misunderstanding, Sandor said, without moving his eyes. The sort that ends with bones broken if we are lucky. You, the captain of the Lannister men barked, are obstructing the Queen's justice. No, the Hound said mildly. I am obstructing you. The captain blinked. We have orders. He persisted, louder because his certainty had shrunk. The Queen desires this boy. Then the Queen can ask the king, Jon said. Until then, the boy is under my protection. He did not look at Gendry. He did not look at the captain. He looked at Sandor and the Hound's mouth quirked. And how will you protect him, little prince? The captain demanded. Now he did look at Jon. The contempt there was new. Word had gone through the keep faster than wine. With the city watch if need be, Jon said. With the law if you prefer. With my own hands if you insist. He took a step and the crowd, which had made itself out of nothing and filled the street with smell and heat, shifted with him like a flock of starlings. He could feel their eyes burn his skin. They wanted a story. He wanted quiet. The captain looked at the people, at the Hound, at Jory, at the gray leather on Jon's shoulders. He looked at the sky, as if it might tell him how many coins his life was worth. Another day, he said finally, and spat to prove he had chosen. He took his men away. Gendry stood very still and looked at Jon as if the prince had just stolen a secret from him. Why? He asked. Because I like your work, Jon said, and that was the truth that was not the whole truth. You'll come to the Red Keep, he added, as a smith's apprentice. We can always pretend we need more rivets. He turned before the boy could speak and walked away before the relief could show in his face. By the time the raven flew from Dragonstone screaming and streaked with soot and letters, The city hummed like a hive. Jon learned the sound of rumor on stone. It was the hiss of men sharpening dull knives on harder surfaces. He learned to read the queen's eyes and judge whether he should go to bed with a blade under his pillow. He learned that Arya Stark could disappear in the Red Keep and find her way back again by sense and bells and instinct. She taught him one day how the kitchen smelled when the sea wind changed, and he thought he would remember the description when he was 100 and never come here again. He woke one morning to a sky so clean it looked polished, and to a silence in the yard outside that was not ordinary. He dressed without calling for his boy. He opened the door and found Ser Barristan Selmy standing there as if he had grown from stone, his white cloak resting heavy in the stillness. "My prince," Ser Barristan said. He had always called him that. He looked troubled. He gave his dignity a new color. "Lord Eddard Stark has arrested Ser Gregor Clegane for crimes in the Riverlands and intends to send him to the king for justice." "Good," Jon said. "The queen does not agree. She would not." "The king is in the kennels," Barristan added, almost apologetic. "Examining dogs. He finds them easier than men today." "Wise," Jon said. He followed the old knight to the kennels and watched Robert kneel in straw and scratch ears, as if he had found at last a court uncorrupted. The dogs adored him. He lifted his head when they approached and scowled, then grimaced at the tug of his healing wound. "Barristan tells me your wolf of a hand is biting my guests," Robert said. "He is doing your work," Jon said. "You ask men to make order of a feast run mad with knives and jugglers. You cannot begrudge the hand if he has to break a few plates." Robert snorted. He would break the Great September if he found it had been built a foot too short. "God save me from men who are right. It's like being pecked to death by swans." He pushed to his feet. "Well, let us go look like kings." He gave the black dog who had leaned its head into his thigh a final rough stroke. "Come and see your future, boy." They went to the throne room. They went to watch men try to make the world follow rules. The rules did not want to. Jaime looked bored. Cersei did not. Joffrey's eyes gleamed. Varys' hands folded dove-white in his sleeves. Peter whispered behind them to someone else and watched the whisper land and spread like grease. Robert ruled. He shouted. He conceded. He was both just and unjust in the course of 1 hour, which is what kings have always been. He stood at the foot of the Iron Throne and looked up as if a bad smell had risen from the metal. He declared Jon his heir again, this time in a scrawl of words that did not reach parchment but reached ears. And the ears went to mouths, and the mouths went to pens, and the pens drew gold and blood. He left the hall with the posture of a man who has beaten his back against a door and realizes it was meant to be opened and not battered. Cersei came to Jon that night with Joffrey and Tommen and Myrcella and no guards and said, "You will not go to the Kingswood again unless you want to be carried back." "I will go when I please," Jon said, and fought the urge to be boy and say it with more heat. "You will do as you please for some time yet," Cersei agreed. "It will end." She took a step, so near now that Jon could see the tiny line of old scar along her hairline no one ever mentioned. "You will lose unless you play. You think you can refuse the board and be applauded for it. I admire the arrogance of a young man." She moved back, with the odd grace she had of turning away without exposing the back of her neck. "Sleep," she said. "Dream of flowers." He dreamed of snow. In the morning, the city had turned itself to watch the bay. Stannis' ships came across the water like moving stairways. The banners were the ones Storm's End had always flown. Stag on gold, righteous and impatient. Stannis came in the way he always did, as if motion were an accusation. He bowed to his brother as if he wanted to find fault with the very air between them. "You left," Robert said. "I returned," Stannis replied. "You did not bring a smile. I brought ships. You brought ships to my harbor as if you meant to take my city. I brought ships because you have no men who can tell you the truth in your hall," Stannis said, and Jon thought for one mad moment that they would begin to wrestle and roll in the dust like children. "Careful," Robert warned. "I am always careful," Stannis said, not meaning the same thing by the word. I come to tell you that your queen means to kill your hand and your son if you let your eyes wander for another moment." Robert laughed and winced and swore and looked at Jon and then at Eddard, who had appeared no one knew from where. "Of course she does," he said. "I married a lioness. I should not be surprised if she grows tired of mice." He scrubbed his face. "Gods, I am hungover." "Name the men you trust," Stannis said flatly. "Send the rest away." "Trust," Robert said, as if describing a dish he had eaten once and could not recall the taste. "I trust the men who killed a boar with me yesterday, and the men who drank with me last night, and the men who will march with me tomorrow. The list changes. The gods know why they let fools king." He straightened with an effort. "Jon," he said, and his voice lost its play, "you will go to Storm's End." Jon had expected it. It still struck like a bucket of cold seawater. "You will go with men I choose," Robert went on.
Ser Barristan.
100 white cloaks if I had them. I have one. The Hound if he will. He looked at Sandor, who had arrived as if conjured by the word. The Hound shrugged. "You will go the long road, not the fast. I will keep King's Landing. I will keep my hand. I will keep my throne if I can do it. You will keep my house. When the dust settles, you will return with Storm's End at your back and 1,000 spears on your horizon." He looked as if he wanted to make an oath and did not know the words. "This is not a retreat," he said. "I send you to hold what is ours, not to run." Eddard's jaw worked, as if he had something to say and would not. Stannis' mouth flattened. Approval for him. "It is wise," he said. "It is necessary," Robert corrected. "I do not often find wisdom and necessity at the same table." He turned to Jon. "Do you refuse me?" "No," Jon said. "Good. I would have you thrown in the sea if you had." Robert's laugh was quick and full of relief. "Go then, this afternoon, quietly. Cersei's eyes are everywhere. She will learn soon enough. Let her. She has more to look at than you." Jon went to his chamber and gathered what a prince gathers when he leaves his home. Less than most think. He took the winter rose wrapped in its blue cloth and tucked it where, if he died, it would be found and perhaps understood. He took the parchment with his father's hand and put it near his skin where the ink would warm to him. He took a plain dagger Jory said had been made in the north and handed to him with a look that asked him to use it only when stories ran out. He took a cloak that would darken in rain and hide him in crowd. He took a handful of coins because even princes need to tip men who risk their lives to pretend not to recognize them. He took nothing else. The Red Keep had watched him learn to walk. It watched him now as he walked out. The stones did not move. They did not speak. He passed the Godswood and did not stop, because if he stopped he would remember nights there with his father telling him about Lyanna's laughter, and he would not go. He went down the narrow stairs by the armory where the walls sweated and the air smelled of oil and old IR. He went along a corridor that had seen men run for their lives and for love and not outpace either. He went to a postern where Ser Barristan stood in white, not gleaming but pale as bone, and Sandor leaned as if to dare the door to collapse under his weight. "Are you ready?" Barristan asked. "No," Jon said and stepped through. They rode out by a way the city had adopted and forgotten and adopted again, on spare horses with plain tack. They went with 10 men whose faces would be impossible to remember if you tried. They passed under a sky that had decided, at last, to rain fully. The water came down with an exuberance that made old women on balconies shout wishes for the harvest and sailors on shore squint at the horizon and hedge their bets. The rain washed the city in a way the city pretended to appreciate and did not. They reached the King's Road without being counted. The King's Road was wide and rutted and sure of itself. The mud took the prince and made promises to hold them and did not. By nightfall they had outdistanced gossip. They made a fire under a copse of beeches, small and mean, and ate meat that had been salted too long and bread that had been burned in a hurry. The conversation was of boots and horseflesh. Barristan spoke very little. The Hound spoke less. "What do you think of me?" Jon asked him when he thought the question might be mistaken for talk to a horse. "I think you're not as soft as you look," Sandor said, not unkindly. I think you bleed good color. Color. Red, like men. The hound snorted and lay back and closed his eyes and was asleep. They rode 2 days thus, through rain and then through sun that returned to remind men it could. On the 3rd day, as the road curved between a stand of birch and a field where rye took the wind, Baratheon pointed with his chin. Riders, he said, not ours. They came at a pace that spoke of coin and obedience both. The banners were not flown. The colors showed on belts and lacings and memory instead. Lannister men, 3 dozen, with a captain who had learned to ride by watching other men do it and beating his horse to match their ease. Prince, Baratheon said. I see them, Jon answered. What do you want? Sandor asked. The question was not to him and not to be answered anyway. Jon turned his horse and set it at the verge of the road where the grass still held dew at its roots. He took his cloak off and wrapped it round his left forearm because he had seen a man do that once to turn the bite of a dog aside. He drew the dagger from his belt and thought of the boar charging and of the spear setting, of letting the enemy break itself on what you held steady. He did not like the size of the dagger in his hand. Barristan's sword came out with the sigh of an old friend. The captain reined up and smiled, the smile of a man who thought he had found a lost jar of honey. Your Highness, he said. He did not bow. By order of the Queen, you are to return to the city. By order of the King, Jon said. I am to go to Storm's End. The Queen is in the city, the captain said. The King is injured. He will want you safe. The King signs his own orders, Baratheon said mildly, resting his blade's tip on his stirrup as if it weighed nothing at all. Sire, the captain said to him, and tried to make either a plea or an insult of the word. Failed. He looked at Sandor, whose face had closed like a barn door in a gale. And you, Clegane? You'll turn on your masters. I don't have masters, Sandor said. I have employment. He smiled. It was a terrible expression, like a wound opening. And preferences. Kill them, the captain said suddenly, because the back and forth had made him aware of the eyes of his men, and those eyes had reminded him of his pride. Take the boy. The Queen will give us gold for each head we bring if we bring his with them. Idiots, Sandor said conversationally, and the road melted into violence. Baratheon moved the way water does when it finds the path it has used for 1,000 years. Sandor moved like a house falling. Jon moved like a boy who had been made to move every day until moving was prayer. The men who had come for gold found iron instead. They died with the surprise very fresh on their faces. When it was done, there were 5 of Jon's men down and 2 groaning and begging for kindness. The Lannister captain stared up at the sky because he had no choice. Sandor had put him there and Sandor had not bothered to look again. Leave their bodies, Baratheon said, wiping cleanly. Let the crows sort what the lions started. We carry our own dead, Jon said, and the old man looked at him and inclined his head. They buried the 5 in a copse and said what words men say when they do not know any that fit. They left the Lannisters to the flies. They rode, and if grief rode with them, it did not slow their pace. By afternoon, the sky had drawn down again and rain began to fall in ropes. Storm's End would welcome them with its old salt heart when they reached it, its drums beating the sea's anger out in thunder. Jon thought of the castle's thick walls and their stories of siege and loyalty, of the boy his father had been and the man Stannis had become between them. He thought of his father in the Red Keep, of Eddard Stark walking among men who sharpened their knives, of Cersei quiet at a window with her cup. He felt, for an instant that had nothing to do with whether the world turned. He put his heels to his horse and the horse lengthened its stride. The road ran ahead, wet and sure and darker than the fields on either side. The men at his back made the low, necessary sounds men make when they ride toward a place that will both shelter and test them. The winter rose was warm against his chest, and the parchment with his father's name was warmer still. Rain came harder. The day smelled of salt and iron and the promise of war, and Jon Baratheon, raised in the Red Keep and sent away by the hand of the man who loved him, rode toward it with his shoulders set and his mouth quiet and his eyes very clear.